I need to apologize, because after that game, I couldn't even bring myself to sit down and do an analysis. What we watched was humiliating, and the question has to be asked, is this a Mike Tomlin collapse? A 30-6 playoff embarrassment against the Houston Texans that didn't just end the Steelers' season, it ripped the curtain open and forced this franchise straight into the 2026 offseason whether anyone was ready or not. The expectation inside the building is still that Mike Tomlin will most likely return for his 20th season as head coach of the Steelers in 2026. The front office and ownership genuinely believe this roster is closer than the final score against Houston suggested. Last offseason was about change. This team leaned heavily into that idea, bringing in DK Metcalf, trading for Jonnu Smith and Yolan Ramsey, and making the bold move to bring in Aaron Rodgers. There was new energy, new voices, and a clear sense of urgency. Now, the feeling is that the theme could shift from change to continuity. Continuity would mean keeping Tomlin in place, likely retaining Arthur Smith, and possibly making adjustments elsewhere, including at defensive coordinator. It would also mean welcoming back veterans who are still under contract and capable of running it back one more time. When you look at the roster honestly, it is largely set. This is not a teardown situation. And there is a very real argument that if the Steelers had even a couple of reliable separators at wide receiver against Houston, that game might have looked very different. That belief that the margin is thinner than it appears is why ownership does not view this as a moment to move on from the only head coach they have had in the Super Bowl era, outside of 3 total names. The Steelers take pride in never firing a head coach, and that pride has not disappeared after a double-digit win season, a division title, and a playoff berth. So if Tomlin is not likely to be fired, why is this conversation even happening? Because there is another path, one that depends less on ownership and more on personal obligation. Mike Tomlin could decide he is done in Pittsburgh. He could decide that after nearly 2 decades, the timing is right to pursue another opportunity. If that were to happen, it likely would not be a long break. The belief is that Tomlin would want to coach again quickly, possibly as soon as next season, and would seek a trade situation rather than stepping away indefinitely. A lot of this hinges on 2 names, Aaron Rodgers and Cam Heyward. If both of those players return, it is hard to imagine Tomlin leaving. There is a sense of responsibility there, especially with Cam Heyward. Tomlin has coached him for most of his career, and there is a clear desire to deliver a championship before Heyward retires. That weight matters. If Cam returns, that obligation remains. If Rodgers returns, that connection matters too. Their relationship is strong, mutual, and very public. Rodgers made that clear after the loss to Houston, visibly frustrated by criticism directed at Tomlin. He enjoys playing for him. Tomlin enjoys coaching him. If Rodgers wants another year, Tomlin likely does too. But if both Rodgers and Heyward retire, the equation changes dramatically. Suddenly, the obligations disappear. The emotional anchors are gone. Tomlin would be staring at another offseason where the Steelers need to solve the quarterback position yet again. In a landscape that is not exactly overflowing with great options via free agency, trade, or the draft, at that point, it is fair to wonder whether Tomlin would rather take on a new challenge elsewhere, possibly with a team that already has a young quarterback in place, instead of restarting that process in Pittsburgh. After 9 seasons without a playoff win, there is a scenario where both sides quietly acknowledge that a clean break could make sense. That possibility, even if it is not the most likely outcome, forces the conversation to shift. If Mike Tomlin does step away, what kind of coach would the Steelers even look for? The checklist starts with leadership. Tomlin's greatest strength has always been commanding a room. Players fight for him, they believe in him. Anyone who replaces him has to bring that same presence. This locker room cannot be led by a quiet technician who lacks authority. The second requirement is staff building ability. One of the criticisms of Tomlin has been his limited coaching tree and connections. The next head coach must be someone who can attract strong offensive and defensive coordinator candidates. And finally, there has to be innovation. The Steelers need a schematic edge, not just culture. This is where the speculation grows louder and the names begin to circulate, because the idea of life after Tomlin, even hypothetically, forces fans to confront a future they have not had to imagine in a very long time. And that raises the question that really matters at this stage. If the Steelers ever do reach that crossroads, do you believe this franchise is actually ready to move on from Mike Tomlin? Or do you think continuity is still the only path forward? What do you honestly think about this situation right now? And once you start seriously entertaining that possibility, the conversation naturally shifts from emotion to preparation, because even if it is uncomfortable, the Steelers would be forced to have a plan. This is not about wanting Mike Tomlin gone. It is about understanding what the organization would prioritize if the decision were ever taken out of their hands. The idea internally would not be to simply find another Mike Tomlin, because that is not realistic. Instead, the focus would be on identifying traits that could realistically stabilize the franchise while also pushing it forward into a new era. Leadership would still be non-negotiable. This locker room has been conditioned for nearly 2 decades under one voice. Players are used to accountability, direct communication, and a head coach who can stand in front of the room after a brutal loss and still have their respect. That matters more than scheme alone. Any successor would need to command immediate credibility, not grow into it over 3 or 4 seasons. Exit interviews would be filled with players openly supporting Tomlin, and that is not something ownership would ignore. Replacing that presence requires someone who can walk into the building on day one and be accepted as the leader of men. Beyond leadership, staff construction becomes critical. One of the quiet realities of the last several seasons is that while Tomlin has been an elite motivator, his coaching network has not consistently produced top-tier coordinator continuity. The next head coach would need deeper connections, especially on the offensive side of the ball, where the league continues to evolve rapidly. The Steelers cannot afford another cycle of outdated concepts or conservative approaches that leave them schematically behind their playoff competition. The expectation would be for someone who brings a modern system, or at the very least, someone who knows how to surround themselves with innovative minds. Quarterback development sits at the center of everything. Whether Aaron Rodgers returns for one more season or not, the long-term answer at quarterback is still unresolved. That reality alone would shape the entire coaching search. A new head coach would not just be tasked with winning games immediately, but with eventually identifying, drafting, or developing the next franchise quarterback. That is why experience working with young quarterbacks, or at least a proven ability to elevate offensive efficiency, would carry significant weight. The Steelers cannot afford to miss again at that position, especially if they are simultaneously transitioning away from the most stable coaching era the franchise has ever known.
There's also the cultural aspect that cannot be overstated. The Steelers believe deeply in identity. Physical football, accountability, resilience, and organizational stability are not marketing slogans in Pittsburgh, they are expectations. Any future head coach would need to align with that philosophy while still adapting it to the modern NFL. That balance is difficult. Too much rigidity risks falling behind. Too much flexibility risks losing the identity that has defined the franchise for decades. This is why the idea of a Tomlin departure is so complex. He has embodied that balance better than almost anyone, even during stretches where postseason success has been absent. What makes this moment especially fascinating is that none of this is being driven by panic. There is no collapse, no implosion, no organizational chaos. The Steelers are coming off a division championship and a double-digit win season. That is what makes the conversation feel surreal. It is not about failure in the standings. It is about the lingering frustration of postseason results and the reality of an aging core at key positions. If Cam Heyward and Aaron Rodgers both choose to return, the window remains open, even if it is narrowing. If they do not, the organization may be forced into a transitional phase whether it wants to be or not. And that is the crossroads. Continuity offers familiarity and belief that one more offseason could be enough. Change introduces uncertainty, but also the possibility of a fresh schematic edge and a new long-term vision. Mike Tomlin stands at the center of that decision, not because he is on the hot seat, but because his own motivations, relationships, and sense of unfinished business could ultimately determine the direction of the franchise. That is not a position many coaches ever reach, and it speaks to the unique nature of his tenure in Pittsburgh, because even after laying all of that out, there is still another layer to this conversation that fans are wrestling with, and it's the hardest one to define. Timing. Not whether Mike Tomlin is capable, not whether he is respected, not whether he still has the locker room, because all of that remains true. The real question is whether the timing of this roster, this conference, and this version of the Steelers still aligns with the timing of Mike Tomlin's vision. The AFC is not slowing down. The path to a Super Bowl is not just about being competitive anymore. It's about being explosive, adaptable, and ahead of trends. The Steelers have survived in that environment, but surviving is no longer satisfying this fan base. The frustration isn't rooted in losing seasons, because those haven't happened. It's rooted in the feeling that every January looks the same, that the ceiling is known before the playoffs even begin. That perception, fair or not, is what fuels this entire discussion. From the organization's perspective, there is also caution. Moving on from Mike Tomlin is not just replacing a coach, it's redefining how the Steelers operate. It would impact free agents, veterans already in the building, and even how players around the league view Pittsburgh as a destination. Stability has always been a selling point. Walking away from that stability carries real risk, especially if the next hire does not immediately produce results. One wrong decision could turn a competitive team into a rebuilding one overnight. At the same time, there's a belief among some that waiting too long can be just as dangerous. If this core ages out without postseason success, and the quarterback situation resets again, the argument will be that the organization missed its window to pivot while still strong. That is where the debate becomes split even among loyal supporters. Some believe loyalty and patience are the Steelers' greatest strengths. Others believe those same traits can become limitations if held onto for too long. What makes Mike Tomlin's situation unique is that he still has leverage. If he stays, it's because he wants to finish what he started. If he leaves, it will be on his terms, not because the Steelers pushed him out. That alone separates this from most coaching transitions in the NFL. It also means the franchise must quietly prepare for both realities at the same time, even if publicly they continue to support their head coach, which they should. This offseason is less about headlines and more about decisions behind closed doors. Conversations with veterans, honest evaluations of the roster, real discussions about what one more year actually looks like, whether continuity truly gives this team its best chance, or whether a shift, however uncomfortable, is eventually inevitable. None of that will be decided by fans, but the passion and reaction from the fan base absolutely matters, because this is one of the rare moments where the direction of the Steelers feels genuinely undecided. So as this story continues to unfold, keep this perspective in mind. This is not about disrespecting a Hall of Fame caliber coach. It's about understanding where the Steelers are, where they want to go, and whether the same path still leads there. And even beyond timing, there's one more uncomfortable truth that has to be addressed if this conversation is going to be honest. The margin for error is gone. For years, the Steelers have lived in a space where small fixes felt sufficient. Change an assistant here, add a veteran there, shuffle pieces and trust culture to hold everything together. That approach kept the floor high, but it may have capped the ceiling. In today's NFL, especially in the AFC, that ceiling matters more than ever. Look at what Pittsburgh is competing against. Teams that are not just well-coached, but aggressively modern. Offenses built to stress defenses horizontally and vertically. Defensive systems designed to disguise pressure until the last possible moment. The Steelers have flashes of that, but not sustained dominance. That doesn't erase everything Mike Tomlin has built, but it does force the organization to ask whether evolution is happening fast enough. And that question is not personal, it is structural. If Aaron Rodgers returns, the calculus changes again, because the goal immediately becomes urgency. You are not planning 3 years ahead. You are trying to win now. That would likely mean running it back with a roster that believes it is 1 or 2 adjustments away. It would mean trusting that continuity, experience, and health can finally align at the right moment. That is the gamble, and it is a gamble the Steelers have historically been comfortable making. If Rodgers does not return, everything slows down and speeds up at the same time. Slows down because expectations reset. Speeds up because now every decision has long-term consequences. That is where a potential Tomlin departure becomes far more realistic, not as an indictment of his coaching, but as a natural inflection point. New quarterback search, new core leaders, possibly a new philosophical direction. That is often when franchises choose to align a new head coach with a new era, rather than asking a long-tenured coach to start over yet again. The most important thing to understand is this: there is no wrong feeling among Steelers fans right now. Wanting Tomlin to stay is reasonable. Believing change may be necessary is also reasonable. Both perspectives come from the same place, a desire to see this franchise compete for championships again, not just respectability. That is why this debate feels so intense. It's not driven by hate or impatience. It's driven by expectation. The Steelers have always been an organization that thinks in decades, not seasons. That is why this moment stands out. It feels like one of those rare forks in the road where either path defines the next 10 years. Stick with continuity and try to squeeze one more true run out of this group, or prepare for a transition while the foundation is still strong enough to support it. And now, it comes back to you, because this fan base has always been part of the identity of this team. Where do you honestly fall on this? Do you believe continuity with Mike Tomlin still gives the Steelers their best chance to break through, or do you feel the franchise is approaching a moment where difficult change is inevitable, and when you strip everything else away,